All right, we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of probably two, maybe three lectures where we are going to have a look at Jewish literature throughout the ages, dealing with the question of pandemics and how to deal with them. I think this is one of those areas of halacha that we thought was part of history, which has now become our present. And so it's important to take comfort and solace from the rabbis who came before us to see how they dealt with difficult situations. And I am indebted and very grateful to the Tzorba Merabanan organization, which is part of Mizrahi, for putting together these resources. I am just a guide presenting them to you. I cannot take any credit for putting together this wonderful curriculum. It says as follows. Can you see here where I have it highlighted? So let's go from here. Another case of sakana, which is danger, is mentioned in the Ramah. That's the Ashkenazic Rabbi Rav Moshe Isserles, who made his glosses to the Shulchan Aruch, to Rav Yosef Kairo's works. And he writes there that has unfortunately become extremely relevant across the globe over the past few months. And that is the danger of dever, a plague or epidemic. Since the pandemic of COVID-19, known also as the coronavirus, has significantly impacted all of our lives during this time, they put together these materials. So here we're going to go into what to do when plagues strike. And we're going to see that there's various approaches, and we're going to see that the position in the Ramah is significantly different from the Gemara. Okay, so the Ramah says as follows. I'm over here in source number 1. One needs to be very careful with all things which can lead to danger. Ki sakanta chamira meisura. And this is a very important language which comes up throughout the Talmud and is in rabbinic literature, because danger is more severe than prohibition, which means we have to be even more careful with how we deal with a dangerous situation, with a life-threatening situation, than we need to do. We need to be careful with prohibitions of Torah level laws or rabbinic level laws. And therefore one needs to be even more careful when there is a doubt of danger than when there is a doubt of prohibition. And you'll remember when COVID-19 first began, SBH, with the wonderful advice of Dr. Robichek, were very careful in making safeguards. And there were those who said we were too careful and that we were too quick to make changes. Says the Ramah here, when there's even a doubt of danger, one needs to be very careful, far more so when there is a doubt of prohibition. Od kadvu, sheyesh livrach min ha'ir kashedever ba'ir. It's also written that one needs to escape, one needs to flee from the city when there is a plague in the city. V'yesh latzet min ha'ir, and one needs to go out from the city. B'tchilat hadever v'lo b'sofo. One should get out when it begins and not when it develops into a full-blown pandemic. V'chol elu hadevarim hem mishum sakana. And all these things is because of danger. V'shomer nafsho. One needs to guard one's soul. Yirachek mehem kayotze bazeh. One needs to really distance themselves and be careful with all of this. So we see here from the Ramah, it seems like a pretty open and shut case, that we need to be very careful when there's any situation of danger. Even a doubtful danger, one needs to do it, and one needs to act at the beginning and not wait till the end when it's a full-blown pandemic. If we have a look here, the Kaf HaChaim, a Sephardic Acharon in the late 19th, early 20th century, studied at SBH every Sunday morning. Kaf HaChaim writes Lefishu choli hamit nabek, because it is a contagious illness. Hashem will make pestilence cling to you, as the pasuk in Devarim. One should even distance oneself from the area where the sick person is standing, or even his possessions or clothing, that one should not be harmed, as it says in Shahar Kavanot of the Arizal. So we see here from the Kaf HaChaim that we have to be very, very careful to the words of the Ramah. And more than just fleeing is the proper course of action, one needs to be careful with the fact that it's contagious. And when it's a contagious thing, we need to be careful also with the area. And it's fascinating, I find it, to read these rabbis who lived in times before modern medicine, before modern science, to see how ahead of the curve they were in making these proclamations. Now, here's where I said it's very interesting. All that is coming from the Ramah, who lived in the 16th century, in the 1500s, and the Kaf HaChaim, who lived in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Now, if you look here at the Gemara was codified around 1500 years ago. The Gemara is going to present something a little different. And we're going to have to say, normally we say we don't contradict what comes before us. And the Gemara is going to say different. And we have to ask how it was that the Achronim would disagree with the Gemara. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught in the Braita, Deve Ba'ir, Knes Raglecha. When there is a plague in the city, you need to gather your feet, which means, Knes Raglecha doesn't mean gather your feet to go on a run. It means gather your feet, gather them into your home. Shneimar, as the verse states, V'atem lo tetzeu mipetach beito ad boker. And it's interesting, it quotes a pasuk from, very interestingly, from Sefer Shemot, which deals with the very first Pesach in Mitzrayim, where it says, and you shall not go out, each one from the entrance of his home until morning. And as we said, that just as that first Pesach, we too spent this past Pesach in our homes. Ve'omer. And there's another pasuk which says, Lech ami ba bechadrecha v'segot elatecha be'edcha. It says that none of you shall go out of the opening of his house until morning. And then, there it says, come, my people, enter your chambers and shut your doors behind you. So here we have two psukim, one in Shemot, one in Yeshayahu, and both seem to imply that what happens, what is the response to Dever? It's not to run away, it's to stay in place. And then there's another pasuk in Devarim, ve'omer, michutz teshakel cherev mechadarim ema. Outside the sword will bereave, and in the chambers terror. So here we have three psukim, which seems to imply staying in place is better than running away, than fleeing. And so we have to say, how do we resolve this Gemara? How do we explain it that it says here that one should stay in place if the Achronim said that we should run away? So we're going to skip down to the Maharasha. And the Maharasha says, Nireh lomar, it seems to say, Delo ba lomar la'afuke shelo yefazer raglav. This instruction of the Talmud to stay at home is not coming to exclude that one should not flee. Because it's not possible to say this. To have vadai bedever ba'ir nami tuv lefazer raglav ulimalet al nafsho. Because it's also a good idea that one should flee and one for one's life. Elahachi perusha. This is what it really means. Kol zaman she'eno mefazer raglav min ha'ir yikanes raglav lebeito v'lo yetzeh berachavot. If you haven't yet fled, you stay in place. And this was exactly the advice at the beginning of this pandemic. At the beginning, you need to get out of where you were and go back to where you needed to stay. But if you delayed in departing, one needed to stay in place. The Maharil also holds that again, that it's preferable to run, to flee. But he explains the Gemara refers to a case where one didn't flee at the onset of the epidemic. In a case where the epidemic has then taken hold across the city, once that's happened, it's preferable to remain at home, as venturing outside may prove to be more dangerous, as one may likely contract the illness this way. Okay, it says the Maharil there, V'hada aminan perek hakones kanus raglecha v'yalif b'mikrai tuva. So concerning that which it says in that perek hakones in Bava Kama, that one should gather one's feet. Shamati mipi harav Shalom sheyichyeh. I heard this from my teacher, Rav Shalom, may he live. Dela'achar shehitchil v'nitchazek v'ityahiv le reshuta lemaske lehedya yesh liknos raglav. But once it has begun and it's established and strengthened, it has been given permission to go openly. One should then go inside. And that's why we say all the major highways are dangerous. But originally, at the beginning, it's better to flee. Now, if you ask someone, I was talking to a friend who is in vacation in Southern California. I said to him, when are you coming back? And he said that they're flying in 2 weeks. I said, why don't you drive back instead of flying? It's going to be dangerous to fly. Why are you risking the airports and the air travel? And he said to me that there's no motels open, and he couldn't face doing a 20-hour drive, so that was the only option to us. Whereas now we're all very thankful that we're staying in place, and the last thing that we want to do is to risk any flying. So we see here that the Maharil and the Maharasha, they're coming to answer how it is that the Rama and the Kaf HaChaim would recommend running away and fleeing from the area where the Gemara says stay in place. And the clear answer is, at the beginning, you should flee away from busy built-up areas. But once you're where you are and the plague is intensified, then the best thing to do is to stay where you are. Okay, so far so good. So it seems like many authorities hold that if possible, it's preferable to flee the city entirely. But if this is not possible, or one has not left yet, it is best not to leave one's home. It's interesting to note that the Rama himself, when he was much younger, fled his hometown of Krakow during the spread of an epidemic there to take refuge in a small town in the Polish countryside. The Rama mentions this in his introduction to his commentary on Megillat Esther, known as Mechir Yain, which he wrote to his father in place of Mishloach Manot, because he lacked the resources to send food or organize a Purim Seudah. So you think we have it bad? Trust me, we survived Purim. We all survived Pesach just very well. So he says here in his Mechir Yain, in his Hakadama, his introduction, a beautiful language. He says, Ani Moshe ben Kavod Abba Mari Haparnes v'Hamanhig Yisrael Shlita, gives his full title. Hanikra Moshe Isserles McKrakow. And some people call me Moshe Isserles of Krakow. It's like that's his English name, and that was his halachic title. And he says here, Haiti b'toch hagola, Hashem galinu me'ireno. And I had to be exiled from our city. And it's very interesting that he uses that lashon, that language of exile, that he really felt that he was being exiled from his makom Torah, from his place of learning in Krakow with his fellow rabbis. So it's almost like that language of hagolah shnitgalnu me'artzenu, which is part of what we say in Musaf, and how we even say it in Megillat Esther, like it's a clear play on words there. He says when he was exiled in that year, Shin Yod Vav, and he says that Mechapat ipush ha'avir, because there was a very bad air quality. Lo aleinu, should not be upon us. V'hayinu gerim ba'aretz lo lanu, we were exiled to a land which was not our own. Be'ir Shidlov. I'm glad I could see the Hebrew there and not the Polish spelling there. I think that's pronounced Shidlov. Makom asher ein te'ena v'gefen. There's no figs or grapes. Ukimat mayim ein nishtot. There's almost no water to drink. V'lo yachilnu lekayem yemei Purim b'mishneh v'simcha. We weren't able to celebrate the days of Purim with festivity and joy. Instead, it became the agony and grief. I said that I would get up and rejoice in my work, in my wisdom. So amarti akuma v'esmach b'mefalai. Hachamti amdali, and I put my heart to explore and expound. V'natati leiv lato ledrosh kavrat ha'megillah. And I got to look at this wonderness of the Ramah, that, and again, this is a life lesson for us all, that in difficult times, we can take these moments to be depressed. We can take these moments to berate what's befalling us. Or you can do what the Ramah did. The Ramah said, it's time to write a Perush on Megillat Esther. I won't do anything in Halakha. Right now, I'll write a commentary on Megillat Esther. I find it so uplifting that's what he did for himself. You know what? In order to have real joy of Purim, I can't have wine, I can't have a Su'udah, I can't have my friends over. I'm going to write a commentary on the Megillah. That's going to be my Purim Su'udah. I think it's really a wonderful lesson of how to keep pushing forward. The Kaf HaChaim offers another reason as to why one should attempt to flee at the beginning of an epidemic and not wait until it has spread. And he says, Ki az lo yachol livroach min ha'ir. If you wait too late, you won't be able to escape. Ki lo yiten lo makom menucha. Because no one will give you a place to take in. Ki gamo havav re'av me neged negoyam du v'korav yachiku. Because even your friends and your relatives, they're not going to let you in if they know where you came from. And therefore, you need to get out soon, because if they know you're coming from a plague, everyone's going to distance themselves from you, and so therefore you'll have no place to go. And again, this is a situation I was telling you about my friend. If you're in Southern California, no one's going to take you in Northern California. You've got to make that straight drive, or you're going to have to risk the plane journey there. According to the Kaf HaChaim, if you wait too long, one may not be able to leave, since even his friends and relatives will be too fearful to take him in. Okay? And that's it. We saw that across Europe with all the borders being closed. So how do these guidelines that we have seen so far apply to our current pandemic of COVID? Clearly, one must evaluate the situation based on the recommendations of the health professionals and not simply based on the rulings in the Gemara and the Ramah. Nevertheless, we can easily extrapolate some general principles from here. First, since our pandemic has spread worldwide, even if one would argue that it qualifies as exactly the same high level of danger as the Dever, there's no point in fleeing, since traveling itself may be dangerous, exactly as the Maharil and Ramah explain. However, the Gemara's advice of remaining at home appears to be exactly on target in our current circumstances, and coincides perfectly with the recommendation of the health professionals and orders of the government to remain at home. So we see here, it's very, I do find it very fascinating that history can repeat itself, and that we can find ourselves, echoing what happened in previous generations. It would also seem apparent from these rulings that one is not obligated to pray in a synagogue with a minyan during such times. If the Achronim ruled that it was dangerous to exit one's home during a dever and one should flee the city completely, then certainly they did not expect one to pray with a minyan, and likely discouraged it as well. This too coincides well with the instructions given by rabbis in many places not to leave one's home to attend synagogue, and in many places synagogues have been closed for that reason. Another important precedent for halachic responses to epidemics can be found in the writings of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, who offered a detailed list of instructions, both religious and medical, for responding to the cholera epidemic in 1831. I just want to show you there how they say cholera in Hebrew. It says here, ha-megefa cholera. You see it there? Kuf ayin lamed lamed reish ayin. Rahman al-Atzlan. So I want to, just before I go into the words of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, one has to be very careful and understand when Rabbi Akiva Eiger lived and what they knew. His advice that he was giving was based on the medical science of that time, and clearly not on our medical time. So when he got his science wrong, the medical advice wrong, it's wrong for our times. When he was saying then, almost 200 years ago, that's exactly what the doctors were telling him. He was very much ahead of his time. I always explain to people, sometimes when you're learning the Rishonim or the Gemara, the Talmud the science can be off. So does that mean that we don't listen to the words of the rabbis? I said no. When they didn't understand the science, okay, so the science is not as relevant. But everything else outside of that is still true. Just because their limited scientific knowledge, which was appropriate for the time, doesn't mean that everything else is no longer conducive. So just something to have in mind when we're reading this. And this is a difficult piece, so we'll read it together in English. A correspondence concerning the cholera epidemic, God forbid, so that people will know how to conduct themselves during these difficult times. I received his letter concerning prayer in synagogue. In my opinion, it is true that a gathering in a narrow area is improper, but it is possible to pray in separate groups, each one consisting of only a small number, approximately 15 people, and they should begin at the light of morning, and afterwards another group, and it should be designated which time each person should come to pray, and the same should be done for mincha. Now, as much as this sounds strange to us reading it, this is exactly what was going on in Israel and what was happening in other parts of the world, that they were having these small minyanim starting at sunrise and having exactly 10, maybe maximum 15. And then only later, when they realized that things were still spreading, did minyanim stop. And one should recite a number of chapters of Tehillim, of one's choosing, after the tefillah, at night and in the morning, and then the text of Kel Rachum Shemecha, and Anenu, and Mi Sha'ana, all these extra prayers, and the Hiratzon following Tehillim, and to mention in it a prayer on behalf of the king of the land as well, so let's pray for the government. And one should also recite the entire prayer of Pitum HaKetoret in the morning and the evening. All these things are things which we are doing today. We are saying Tehillim. We are saying Pitum HaKetoret. In Sephardim, we say Pitum HaKetoret every day, but twice in the morning and once before Mincha, so 3 times a day. But in the Ashkenazic community of adding this Pitum HaKetoret, and obviously we're adding all these extra prayers for praying for the well-being of all those who are working, medical health professionals, etc., etc., making sure that everyone is okay. And one should be careful that more than the aforementioned number of people not pushed to enter the synagogue, and this can be done by stationing a policeman to supervise, that once there is already the maximum number present, they should not allow others to enter until after they have concluded. And that's something which has happened, and that is something which is which was taking place, but people were very careful to make sure that it wasn't going too much over with those numbers. One should not be nervous, and one should distance himself from all types of sadness. One should not walk at night in the air of the city, but in the afternoon, when the sun is shining, it is helpful to walk in the fields to get fresh air, and open windows in the morning so the air enters the room of one's home. And again, not necessarily so good for cholera, but this is very good advice for us about our mental health. that we shouldn't get ourselves into moments of melancholy. And certainly we should be enjoying these wonderful spring days and enjoying walks around and getting fresh air. He continues, my holy congregation here did what I instructed them, to focus their hearts on Hashem, to inspect their actions, to improve on wrongdoings, to knock on the entranceway of Hashem with prayers and supplications. And that's another important thing here, that we do not believe that these things which are happening to us are happenstance. Clearly, we don't understand why COVID-19 has befallen us, but it is indicative and it is incumbent upon us that we examine our ways and examine our actions to see if there's things that we can improve in ourselves to do better. And to try, and also to pray for our master, the great king, again, praying for the government. Hashem should raise his glory and his children, officers, servants, and all the residents of our country, and to increase the amount of tzedakah given, which saves one from death. Again, these are timeless things, to pray for the government, to pray for their health care, to pray, to give tzedakah, to improve our acts of ma'asim tovim and chesed. Really timeless advice. I also warn time after time, warning after warning, that people's manner of eating and drinking should be according to what the doctors have instructed, to be cautious about, and they should distance themselves from them like the distance of two bow shots, as if they were forbidden foods, and they should not violate their words even to a hair's breadth. And this includes being careful about everything the doctors say, such as not going out from one's home in the morning or on an empty stomach, and the necessity to drink hot water beforehand. And here he concludes, V'ha'over al tzivui harofeim, whoever transgresses the instructions of the doctors, Beseder ha'hanhaga, in the manner of practice, choter l'Adonai ma'od, he sins greatly to God. Ki gadol sakanta mi'isur, and again that same phrase, because danger is far more severe than prohibition. Ubeprat, especially b'makom sakana lo ul'acherim, especially when he is causing himself to be in danger or to cause others to be in danger. Chas v'shalom. Hitpashtut hacholi be'ir v'gadol avono minso. He, God forbid, causes the illness to spread through the city, and his sin would be too great to bear. This is a very important language in halacha. Gadol avono minaso, that is, his sin is too great to bear, which means there's no real getting out of it. There is a limited teshuvah that can help, because he has done such a grievous crime, a grievous sin, that is more than any recompense can help. Very fascinating language here. Again, we could argue and say about his the medical advice there, which the doctors were promoting, but his point is, listen to the doctors. And this is something, again, I'm not trying to get rewards or points, but something which is fascinating to understand. There were rabbis who thought they knew what to do better than the doctors. And I and others said, no, we need to remember what we know and what we don't know, and to also understand who are the experts in different lives and different fields. When it comes to pandemics and infectious diseases, I'm not an expert in that. And so therefore, I can use my help as a community leader to help the community. But when it comes to what advice people should be doing, I take my advice from medical health professionals. And again, if in 200 years we found out that the medical health professionals were wrong, okay, I would stand by every single word written here by Rabbi Akiva Eiger and say, this is a language, this is a way to do it. Do everything the doctors say, make sure to do tefillah only if it's safe to do so, and if it's not safe to do so, which we found out it's not safe to do so now, then I have no problem with Zoom Minyan. Doesn't mean I don't miss Minyan, doesn't mean that we don't miss Kriyat HaTorah, doesn't mean that we don't miss being able to say Kaddish for loved ones who have passed, but it means that we're taking things as seriously and as carefully as we need to in order that we all get through this as healthily as possible and with as little risk to life as possible. I want to pause at this time, and I want to open it up to questions, if anyone would like to ask. So if you'd like to ask a question, please unmute yourself.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment.
Yes, Sharon.
I find it absolutely amazing to read this and to see how similar it is to what we're going through now. It's just fascinating to me that, you know, this is stuff that was going on hundreds of years ago, and it seems like we're reading a newspaper today here by what they're saying. Fascinating.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Sharon. I was reading this Rabbi Akiva Eiger Tshuva, and I came across it about a month ago before this, maybe even a little longer, maybe even 5 or 6 weeks ago when it first came out, before this Surah Rabbanan was put together. And it was like reading a contemporary posek writing today about what to do. It was really fascinating and really just a constant thing of ein davar chadash tachat hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun, and if we don't learn from history, you know, we become history. And the importance of really being very much thoughtful in what we're reading and how we're reading it, and being able to understand it. I mean, again, another thing which I found in this period is a tremendous amount of hubris that we 21st century humans had before COVID-19, and how much humility this has given us, that we're not all powerful, we're not all knowing. And thank God, yes, most of us are listening to our medical professionals and following the guidelines, but we don't truly know everything. And to be humble and to be, you know, to have that fear of heaven again upon us, where we need to be, you know, really careful with what we're doing.
Rabbi?
Yes, Sarah.
Okay. It's interesting here in terms of that they say, you know, that if there's a plague in a city, run elsewhere. And then, you know, if the plague continues where you're at, just stay where you're at. That seems so prevalent in terms of today, and especially in terms of New Yorkers who went to Florida, the Jewish, and this was right before Pesach, and then they needed to get Pesach items, which put pressure on the community that they were in, because they ordered prior to knowing that there was going to be this coronavirus, just what the community needs. And yet when people ran to Florida to get away from the New York area, it put pressure on that, on Florida, and they were, the kosher stores didn't want to serve those from New York because they wouldn't have enough for their own people.
Right, Sarah. I mean, there was a big push by the Florida-based rabbis to encourage New Yorkers to stay home and not to come down to Florida, where there was a relatively older population, to risk the spread of COVID-19. Absolutely. And but those edges there, which is, I think my wife was showing me this videos of all the kosher Pesach Coca-Cola, whether you Coke bottles, and there was just in this supermarket, which was like going on for it seemed like it was going on for miles, but probably wasn't miles, but thousands and thousands of kosher for Passover Coke bottles, which weren't going to be had. But it's a very interesting position of today, and I think that's exactly right, that no one wanted anyone from New York. And the advice I was giving to families whose college-aged or post-college-aged kids who are in New York who are coming home for Pesach was, if they're going to come home, they've got to self-quarantine and self-isolate for 2 weeks. And then only then should they come up and be involved with the family, and how difficult that was for families to get that 2-week quarantine period, but how essential it was. Otherwise, that risk of an area of large infection infecting an area of relatively low infection. I'm still, very thankful, and I pray to God every day that the Seattle Jewish community, although we've been affected by having loved ones from other parts of the country affected, Baruch Hashem, we've been relatively unaffected on a local based situation. Again, Hashem should watch over all of us, but it's something that I'm very thankful to God, and something that we have to be very careful with and to maintain, because it only takes one person, and then there's a whole cluster, and then as close as our community is, even with social distancing, I really do worry that if someone in our community would it would spread fast. So it's just something that we're careful of, and we have to be thankful for, to Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
To Sarah's point, I think about when I think the advice that we're seeing from the Ramah was to leave the city to go to somewhere more rural rather than leaving the city to go to another city. And I think what struck me about that is it makes a lot of sense based on the particularly bubonic plague and things that were around in the Middle Ages. The prevalence of spread was very, very high in the cities. And so the conventional wisdom at the time, in cities like London or across Germany, was to get out of the cities where it was being spread.
100%, I think that's that's the point. I don't think we can say my blood is redder than yours, and therefore I'm willing to go from my area to another city. Clearly the Ramah wouldn't put anyone else at risk, and they were saying, and also not to put themselves at risk, they were trying to lower their chances of themselves catching it and passing it on by going to the country. And again, I know quite a few Seattleites who have chosen to go to their, if they've got little places up in, Sancadia or whatever, to get away from it for, that's an example of getting away from it rather than going from one place of high population to another. Exactly.
I was wondering, the congregations and communities that still chose to have minyanim, did they have any halachic justification for their choice?
Sharona, we lost you a little bit there. You got muted, and was there halachic justification for having minyanim? Was that your question?
Yeah, the communities that continue doing it, certainly in Israel, that continued going. Do you think there are teshuvot to the contrary of what we're learning right now, that we're encouraging them to be doing what they were doing?
I think there's a position of, and again, this is more of a hashkafic mold, and again, I'm not position of who is really in charge. Is it the doctors or is it Hashem? And is it my time to die or not? And what are my things which I need to do to make sure that I am staying alive as much as possible? Is that praying with a minyan, tefillah b'tzibur, or is that making sure I get the best medications and have the best medical advice and everything else? And everyone has a different take on that, just as poskim have a different take on that. And I think that at the beginning, there was a real battle between those of us who are more science-based and Rabbi Akiva-based, perhaps, who are saying, you know what, you've got to listen to the doctors, and the doctors say, don't do it, don't do it. And the others saying, I'm going to go to minyan until I'm told I'm not allowed to go to minyan. I mean, it's a question here. This language of sakanta chamira mi'isura, that sakana, the danger is more strict than prohibition, and even doubtful danger one needs to be careful for. If you look at it from here, it's a basically open and shut case. There was a doubtful situation, and therefore we need to be careful. And therefore, bottom line, there should have been no minyanim. There was no argument. But there were other schools of thought, which, again, not to break it down, Haredi versus modern, because I think there were people on both sides of the aisle presenting that we need Hashem's help. And how do we have Hashem's help? Not by praying alone, but by praying together. So therefore, let's try whatever way possible to have minyanim. Maybe it's going to be minyan b'tzimtzum, just exactly 10 men. Perhaps it's going to be a minyan outside in the street. I could certainly understand whether I agree with them is another point, but I could certainly understand what their rationale for it was. But problematic as it may seem to us to do it. Again, one of those things of being dan lekav zechut, of judging everyone favorably, of saying, I don't think it was just, I don't believe in doctors and I only trust in Hashem. I think there was a feeling of, this is our primary way to get through difficulty is calling out to Hashem. One of the things which I think why Zoom Tefillah is so popular is because it's so hard to pray on oneself that even if you don't have a minyan, being able to be together is very meaningful. But as to what was the absolute reason for why they were permitting, why certain groups were having minyanim, I think some of them weren't listening to their own rabbis. I mean, I saw that in ultra-Orthodox circles, the rabbis came out with proclamations saying, don't get together with minyanim, and people were still doing so. So it's not necessarily so cut and dry. Sometimes it's the heart overtakes the intellect, and sometimes it's the masses over the individuals. And sometimes they don't want to listen to their rabbis, which was why it was so hard to push forward. Sarah, I think you had a point.
It's Josh. I'm sitting in. By the way.
Oh, Josh, come on in.
I really enjoyed your shiur tonight. I have another shiur in a few minutes with Rabbi Kletenik. But I think my question is this. Don't we have a basic halacha? Dina de malchosa dino. If the government, whether it's the federal government or the state government, decides a certain rule, it is the obligation that we must follow that rule and not to take above that and taking the attitude, Hashem will help and we must have a minyan. The rule is very clearly, synagogues are closed, no minyanim.
Josh, I couldn't agree more with you. The law of the land, Dina de Malchuta Dina, is 100% a halachic, imperative, and one that we must follow. But again, not my place necessarily to justify ultra-Orthodox position, but I think that they have a skeptic's position to government officials, whether that's the state of Israel or whether that's any country that they're living in, that they are almost to a paranoia, that they have a concern with being told what to do and whether their government is acting in their best interest or not. I think that we who are more, cosmopolitan perhaps, or more understanding of our governments, whether it's in Israel or it's America or wherever we might live, I think we appreciate that our governments at most times are acting in our best interest. And I think that to go into the psyche of a Haredi person, perhaps that's not always been the case. It certainly wasn't the case in Russia, it wasn't in communist Russia and throughout history. So I think there's a lot of emotional baggage which comes with that, which could be why that is. Anyway, my friends, I have to stop here. It's 7:46. We've gone 1 minute over, and I hope you'll join me next time for our next session.